I wrote all the ways in my journal that I have kidnapped myself in my life, like all of the jobs that I've taken. Like, I can't tell you how many people have said, like, I need to stay in this job so that I have another year on my LinkedIn profile. Like, all of the little things I've
Oof.
done to just hold myself hostage in versions of my life that don't work for me so that I can look like I'm surviving, so that I can feel like I'm surviving and getting by. And, I get it. I get why people do that. It's like sometimes we forget, like, living in and of itself is such an achievement. Like,
Yeah.
you've got to get out of bed. You've got to, like, go to school if you go to in a country that you need to get educated. Sometimes we don't feel well. You've got to make money, put food on your table. It's an achievement to exist. Like, it
Yeah.
requires a lot. And so to me, just realizing, like, having compassion for those versions of myself and for other people who are out there kind of holding themselves hostage is so important, but also raising that awareness. So I wrote down all of the different life events that I had chosen to just hold myself hostage in my life. And I made that decision after writing my journal, like, I need to set myself free. And I think you always are really a decision away from a completely different reality. It doesn't have to be so dramatic or big to make a big decision.
Ashley, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Welcome to me. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome to this moment. This is the only one we have if you're with us watching on YouTube or wherever you are. Thank you. Thank you for being
Yeah.
here. This is a wonderful person I've gotten to know through her media, which we're going to talk about. This is the one and only Ashley Stahl. I pronounced your last name correct?
Yeah. Boop,
All
boop,
right.
boop, boop.
So the thing about this conversation that I've been looking forward to is we all like driving cars all the time. And
Yeah.
typically people are really stressed out. And
Yeah.
they're driving in a car and they're in a thought loop and they're going the same direction. Some people though, some people in their lives, they decide, you know what? I'm tired of driving in this one direction. I'm going to make a U-turn.
Yeah.
We know what a U-turn feels like because we drive our car around. But your book, U-Turn, Get Unstuck, Discover Your Direction, Design Your Dream Career. This is a massive topic. I mean, it's
Yeah.
very nuanced and it's very personal for so many people. You yourself, from national security to a career coach, which is like, whoa, there's a story to
Yeah.
unpack there.
Obvious career pivot right there.
But for people that don't know you, your TEDx, which we're going to talk about, we're going to unpack so many things about the psychology of change, the behavior change science, and also the emotional intelligence aspect of the A to Z of what you do. But if people don't know you, Ashley, and they're seeing you in an elevator and maybe they're just at Starbucks with you, what would you say to them if they said, Ashley, what do you do? What's a casual sentence or two that you might tell them?
I definitely want to talk about counterterrorism because I feel like that was my early 20s and it's like a red herring, even though it's such a huge part of my life and a huge part of the book I wrote. But I would probably say I'm a career expert. So I help people figure out who they really are and how to bring it into their career path and make decisions that feel exciting for them.
Who we really are, which is
Mhm.
like, I feel like it's always this amalgam of like our life experience, our level of consciousness, all the things that we've been through. You yourself right now are going through a health journey, right? So wellness
Yeah.
is a full-time job for you right now. And so it's perfect you're on Wellness Force because we're here at this bridge, Ashley. We have this physical and emotional intelligence, and then we have this doing. So
Yeah.
we know the knowledge, but then how do we actually do? There's this bridge in the middle, and it's our breath, and it's our heart, and it's our intention. In your
Yeah.
TEDx talk, Get Unstuck, Discover Your Direction, Design Your Dream Career is your book. But in your TEDx talk, you really pivoted yourself huge. And you pivoted from this story where you actually, like, technically were not kidnapped, but through a story, you were kidnapped. It was a
Yeah.
kidnap phone call. And I was so blown away. I was so emotionally moved by this TEDx video. 3 million people across the
Yeah.
world have seen it now. It's a great jumping off point for us to talk about changing the direction of your life and what happens when we all can get that phone call or that pivotal point for us. Do you remember exactly what you were doing when that phone call happened, when that all went down? You said you were in your Beverly Hills office, just kind of going about
Mhm.
your life. It's a massive story. Could you take us to that point and just unpack that?
Yeah. So my dad got a phone call. I was in my office. I think I was recording a podcast at that time for my show. And so I was complete my phone was off and well, it wasn't off. It was just like do not disturb. But I kept noticing calls come in somehow nonetheless. And my dad was in the kitchen with my mom. He got a phone call from an unknown number. And basically, there's a woman screaming on the other line of the phone. And in front of her was the voice of a man saying, "We have your daughter, and we're going to kill her if you don't do what we say to you right now." And it's like they hijacked his amygdala and his brain. And obviously, he wasn't able to make focused decisions. And looking back, I'm really impressed with how he handled this because he really stayed as collected as somebody could.
Yeah.
I have a big sister who passed away, and so I'm his only daughter now, and so he's, gonna do anything when he gets a phone call like that, and he didn't realize that this was just kind of a scam, and this happens all the time in different countries. It happens in our country, in the
Yeah.
US, but he didn't know that at the time, so he ended up listening to this guy. He waved over to my mom. He became totally paranoid that maybe somebody was outside the house watching him. He wrote on a napkin for her, like, letting her know, like, "Somebody's kidnapped me," according to what he thought he knew. And he said to be quiet because he had this paranoia that if they knew she was there too, maybe they could hurt my mom too, or something like that. He was just not thinking clearly. And eventually, how it evolved was they asked him to go to the bank and wire money. And meanwhile, my mom was calling me, but they had threatened him. They said, if you contact her, we're going to hurt her.
Mm.
And so I don't know how, I mean, it sounds like such a blur, but basically, a policeman ended up texting me, and I saw it right as my podcast guest had ended. And I called this police officer, and there was all this commotion where he was screaming at my dad in what ended up being a bank. Like he kept himself on the phone with these scam artists all the way to the bank. And I heard the police officer run, yell across the bank, like, don't wire any money, like hang up the phone. And it's crazy because my dad's 77 and he played such a huge role in my, like, not just my life being my dad, but in my career. Like some of the experiences I had watching him in his career have
Mm.
hugely impacted me in my own career. And so, just seeing him so shaken up at 77 years old, like it literally feels like it took 5 years off of his life. And to this day, he can't watch this TED talk with me talking about it. But the reason I bring this up in the TED talk was because that evening I had a lot of reflection on what happened. I came to see him immediately. He was so shaken when he got me on the phone.
Yeah.
I drove to their house, and he was just this fragile man, and my sister had only died, months prior to this. So he was in a lot of grief having lost a daughter in real life. And I just spent a lot of time with him and found this weird feeling inside of me of it feels confusing to say compassion for the people who kidnap or who allegedly kidnap people on the phone and fake it. And but I just realized, like, you've got to be in pretty dire circumstances in your life
You have to
to
be in such massive pain to be able to
massive
manipulate and
pain.
hurt other human beings like that.
Yeah, and the fact that they're just spending their day cold calling and scaring the shit out of people and threatening people that they love's lives, it's insane. So I just felt like this, wow, this reminds me of so many people in some way or another who feel kind of like fear and limitation has kidnapped them from really having the life that they want. And that's why I started the TED Talk off with this story and the question that I love to ask, which is, what do you know that you wish you didn't know? Because at any given moment, we know something and we don't like that we know it. It's inconvenient to know something.
Yeah.
And we spend all day and we organize our lives around pretending that thing doesn't exist. And so I just love asking people, especially when they work with me in any capacity, whether it's a course or anything, to figure out, like, what are they hiding from themselves with, because you can't have any change in your life until you face the truth. It's kind of like transformation 101, but we all forget it, including me sometimes.
Yes.
So yeah, that's the TED
Wow.
Talk.
It's so profound. You guys must watch it. It's a
Thank
must.
you.
I typically don't watch TED Talks, as I was sharing with you before we recorded, but this one, like, I almost cried.
Thank you.
And it's very touching. And you have a unique speaking ability. You're very articulate. You understand how to use voice and pitch to reach
Mhm.
people. And I'm curious to pull the e-break even further to talk about
Yep.
your U-turn. You know, in that talk, you mentioned you wrote on the journal that night. I think you said, "I ways that I am my own kidnapper. How do I
Yeah.
kidnap myself?"
Mhm.
And I thought that was so profound because how many people really realistically take any kind of emotional inventory in their life? With my clients, I have an emotional inventory process where we split the things that are causing us pain and driving pleasure and what are we grateful for. But there's something really profound and really unique that came up for you when you began this process, which I think propelled you into even more ways that you do what you do now.
Yeah.
Do you remember that night? I mean, you must have been going through so much emotion and just so much when you got home. How did that come through where you wrote that on the top? I have it right here, actually. You said, "I'm my own kidnapper."
Yeah, I wrote all the ways in my journal that I have kidnapped myself in my life, like all of the jobs that I've taken. Like, I can't tell you how many people have said, like, I need to stay in this job so that I have another year on my LinkedIn profile. Like, all of the little things I've
Oof.
done to just hold myself hostage in versions of my life that don't work for me so that I can look like I'm surviving, so that I can feel like I'm surviving and getting by. And, I get it. I get why people do that. It's like sometimes we forget like living in and of itself is such an achievement. Like
Yeah.
you've got to get out of bed. You've got to like go to school if you go to in a country that you need to get educated. Sometimes we don't feel well. You've got to make money, put food on your table. It's an achievement to exist. Like it
Yeah.
requires a lot. And so to me, just realizing like having compassion for those versions of myself and for other people who are out there kind of holding themselves hostage is so important, but also raising that awareness. So I wrote down all of the different life events that I had chosen to just hold myself hostage in my life. And I made that decision after writing my journal, like, I need to set myself free. And I think you always are really a decision away from a completely different reality. It doesn't have to be so dramatic or big to make a big decision.
What do you think holds people back the most? It's a big question. I don't know if there's one answer, but what do you
Yeah.
think holds people back the most from actually in their body and in their heart, not just in their mind? Because people think like freedom is a mental thing. We can
Yeah.
intellectualize being free, we can intellectualize being healed, but to embody it's way different. So, what is it like? Is there a few ingredients that you've
Yeah.
seen over this time that makes people truly free?
Yeah, I love that. I think one thing is clarity. Like, if you don't really know yourself, you're going to just turn your career and your life into this graveyard of trial and error. And sometimes there's some great things about that. But I think the world makes way for people who have clarity. And it's not to say that we always are going to have clarity. We're constantly in transition. That's who we are. We are transitioning. And so my biggest thing for anyone who really wants something is for them to make the decision to go on the path to get that clarity, because in order, like the quotes say, in order to get somewhere new you need to do something new. And clarity comes from engagement. It's never going to come just from thought. That's like sitting in a rocking chair and hoping you're somewhere else by the end an hour later. So I would say that's one huge ingredient for people holding themselves back. The second thing is this dynamic between fear of the unknown and our misery in our current situation. I think these two dynamics really are always at play in our lives, our careers, our decisions. So the fear of the unknown usually will paralyze somebody, but they usually won't launch in and override their fear of the unknown until their misery in their current state is so much
Yeah.
that they no longer care about the unknown because they're too miserable. And so my thing is, what can we do for anybody listening? What can I do for anybody in my life for them to lower that threshold so that they don't have to get to misery? They can start asking questions when they're lukewarm too many days in a row.
You just hit my heart so strongly. I have, in the past 2 weeks, I've been doing a lot of deep work because I have a son on the way, and so
Yes.
his middle name is my
Congratulations.
grandfather's name, and so I've mentioned this. Maybe this is the second or third time I've mentioned it, so my audience is probably like, "We know, Josh," but I got to tell you again because it's exactly what Ashley's talking about. His middle
Yeah.
name's Morrow because my commitment is to heal all my generational wounding, all the
Mm,
things that have happened to my father, my grandfather, and everyone that I potentially will pass on to my
mhm.
son. And so it's this beautiful reminder for us to not necessarily choose, Ashley, to repeat the same things, that we've learned that are harmful. Do you, in your work and with your clients, specifically with the person you were talking about that was on LinkedIn, and they're like, I need to be on LinkedIn for one more year,
Yeah.
even though I hate my job. These beliefs are passed on. They're
Mhm.
passed on and on and on. How do you address this in your work with your clients and your programs where you're actually guiding people through generational pain, making them aware of it?
Mhm.
Like, hey, you're repeating your parental patterns here. Is there a process you take people through for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what's so fun about me having a book and a message that's around job hunting is that I kind of have a message for the masses. And so I don't open the door with the concept of healing, but your career is really about healing and confidence and your mindset. Like your bank account is a direct reflection a lot of the time of where your mind's at. And so
Yeah.
it's like I have to know how to do this work. And so there's so many different modalities that I've learned, but one of my favorite ones is number one, just starting kind of light and asking people like, what was the conversation like in your house about your career, about failure, about success? What did you witness in your family? Like I watched my dad, hugely successful with millions and millions of dollars, lose it all, and we lost our home, and we moved to the suburbs when I was like 7, which is a very formative time in the child in a person's brain. That's right when all of your beliefs and your, patterns are being programmed
Yeah.
into your mind and solidified. So I really believed a lot about loss and about how you can't keep success and how, money is what brings you fun. And when you lose it, it's gone. So I like to just have a lighter conversation with people out of curiosity about, did people talk about money or career or success in your house? Like, what was the vibe? And from there, usually people have their own pain, their own limitations. And so I always ask people, like, what are you believing about your career right now that's keeping you stuck? And so I'll have them fill in the blank. I'm not where I want to be in my career because, and I'll just put like a line, like what? And usually it's a limiting belief. It's not something that's actual. Sometimes I will hear somebody that says, in order for me to get this promotion, they told me I need to finish this certification. So it's like logistical. And then I could argue with them and say, well, you could do it somewhere else. You don't need that there. So
Yeah.
but I will usually hear something like, well, I need another year of experience of this thing, or I don't have enough experience with that thing, or I'm not as good at this. It's all limitations. It's all bullshit. And so usually from there, I'll ask them for a moment in their life where they felt that very present for them in their career. And they'll take me into a conversation at work or something where their peace was totally disturbed and they felt that belief so strongly, and then I'll ask them to go back into a memory in time. Like, when was the first time you ever felt that in
Yeah.
your life? And I'll figure out, like, what was the aspect of them that was present. So, was it sadness? Was it anger? And I'll ask them to give that aspect a voice. So, maybe back, maybe John Doe, he doesn't believe he can get anywhere because he's not good at math and he keeps messing up with math. I don't know. And then I'm like, where'd you get that from? Well, in grade school, my teacher like totally freaked out when I failed my test. And my parents punished me and da da da. Okay, well, when's a time at work where you felt that? We'll go through that. We'll go into that moment in his memory. And I'll say, what was the aspect of you that was present? How did you feel? And he'll say, I felt like a failure. And then I'll want to have him maybe journal for 7 days from the voice inside of him that feels like a failure, free form writing. I'll teach him how to forgive himself for those beliefs and to come up with new empowered beliefs. I mean, the truth is, we're making up everything. So we might as well make ourselves win in the thoughts that we think, because life just is more friendly that way.
Mm. It's so funny. We literally met each other and I said, welcome to the game or something like that. Because I really believe that it's been a shift that's happened for me as I've coached more people recently. And also this whole phrase of like, what's my purpose? How do I find my dream? People just get so addicted, actually. And I'm curious how you feel about this, to the stress of
Mhm.
being in constant fight or flight.
Yeah.
Kelly Brogan talked about this on the podcast. Dispenza talks about this in his work. What is it about people that in their psyche that is that they're afraid to look at when it comes to being addicted to being in stress, to being addicted to being in that seesaw that life is
Mhm.
so hard, life is so hard. Now, look, I have compassion. It could be capital T trauma, lowercase t trauma. I get it. But what do you think that is in the human psyche that allows us to become addicted to the struggle instead of
Yeah.
just receiving and organically living?
Well, the good news is that we, according to research, we do need some stress to activate, and it's very productive and it's important for a life that you live on the edge
But there's
because
a limit.
but there's a limit, and we're
Yeah.
all kind of living in the limit. I just read a new study by Asana that 89% of workers right now are working later than they did in 2019. And 9 out of 10 workers admitted to being burned out on their job. And so our poor little adrenals are just turning into a blob of nothingness, and we
Yeah.
are all so exhausted. And I think that it really comes back to worthiness. And it's interesting because busyness has just become this culturally acceptable insanity that we all seem to, I don't know, have as like this badge of honor. And I think COVID has really disrupted that and forced us to not be so busy. And I think a lot of people, I don't know if it's a case of use it or lose it, but they're feeling more introverted than ever. And then some people are feeling more extroverted than ever, like, get me out of the house. I need people. And so I think it would be just important for anybody who's feeling that exhaustion or stress to ask themselves, like, why don't I feel worthy of wellness? Why don't I feel worthy of feeling like I can have that conversation with my boss and keep my job? Why do I feel scared to set boundaries? What am I making it mean about me, about the world around me, about what's possible for me? For a long time, I actually had a fear of canceling things because I would get a lot of big opportunities as an entrepreneur, and I would think like, I can't cancel that thing or reschedule it. Like, no matter how sick I feel today, or no matter how much my thing needs me and my mom needs me today or whatever. And I've formed such a better relationship with like reschedules and canceling. And it's not that I'm flaky at all, but it's a reflection, I think, of the permission I've given myself to be worthy of spaciousness when my body needs it and my
Mm.
soul needs it. And so, anybody listening who's burnt out right now, it's like that's a worthiness issue. And that's my message on that.
Let that land for a moment. Can we just take a big breath on that?
Yeah.
Whoa. Everybody can feel that.
Yeah.
Everybody can feel that right now. Everyone. I don't care if you're full-time entrepreneur or you're working in a company. One of the things that you talk about in your book, and by the way, we're talking about the book U-Turn, about getting unstuck, discovering your direction. I love that, discovering your direction, not trying to force your direction, actually
Yeah.
discovering it. And
We're
then, of
all
course,
forcing our direction enough.
we're all
Yeah.
being forced enough, right? With
Yeah.
with exactly the paradigm that you're talking about. So when we look at designing the dream career, I'm curious for you, when you wrote on the top of that paper that night after the ordeal, you said, "I'm my own kidnapper." Just so people can be clear on the road you've walked. What was one or two really big beliefs that you were like, "I'm done. I'm going to cut the rope on the kidnapper." What was that for you?
Mm, the biggest belief I had was that the default life I have ahead of me, if I don't make a change, is so much worse than the rejection, vulnerability, and misery that I might feel putting myself out there. That the long term misery was so much worse. So I wasn't necessarily motivated by inspiration originally. I was motivated a lot more by like fear of what my life could be. It's a powerful motivator.
That's honest.
Yeah,
Hmm.
but I did shift into, I think one of my core beliefs is like life is rigged in your favor. And as long as you're living like it's not going to work with you. Like if you're forcing your life, like that's just a choice and a way of living. So I know Rumi's quote, live life as if it's rigged in your favor. And I really do believe that. So I started to ask myself, if life is rigged in my favor, what do I want to happen? Who do I want to be? What do I want to do? And I've really started to then ask myself, who do I need to connect with? Who do I need to be around? And it's funny, a lot of friends tell me that I'm good at networking, which is like super weird for me because, and I have a whole course on how to get a job. So I get it, but I don't identify as like a networker because when I think of networking, I think of like stale cheese cubes and like wine and like a networking event and business
Conversations where
cards.
people look around the room. It's who else is there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because I think why I've succeeded at it is because I won't network with anybody, no matter how big they are. It could be God himself, which I mean, or like Oprah. But if they're not kind or like they make me feel tired, I'm not going to, I just won't do it
Yeah.
because I just think that there are so many people in the world that can make an impact for you that you can make an impact for. And so I think the reason I've loved networking is because I've done it sustainably, where I've committed to only connecting with people that I resonate with, and I haven't taken things personally. So I have a pretty good relationship with rejection. Like I see it as a necessary piece on the block towards success. So for me, I'm like, okay, I'm going to send 100 emails out about this one thing. And if 10 people write me back, those are the 10 people I'm supposed to connect with. And that's awesome. And that's it. And then I connect deeply with those people. I pay attention. Like I stay in touch, and I don't need anything from them. I try to give. And then as a result, all of this stuff comes to me anyway, which is super cool.
But you have sharpened your sword of intuition. Like the only reason you know how to find the breadcrumbs is because you've trained yourself to do so.
Yeah.
So what is it in your work where, especially for millennials, like, I mean, look, I'm 1 foot millennial. I'm 1980, so I'm like one millennial foot, one whatever my
Gen
generation
X.
is,
Yeah.
Gen X, right?
Hmm.
And so I understand both. I really do. I feel like in my the mother of my child and my partner Carrie, like she's a millennial, so I get it. Like there is a different mindset
Yeah.
in being a millennial because you're very technology focused. And for a lot of millennials, specifically the ones that I've coached, they're so disconnected from their somatic and
Yeah.
from their head to heart connection because they've been trained on devices and productivity and blind video games. And like, look, there's a place for those. My
Yeah.
question to you is, how do you approach conversations with people that are specifically millennials that
Mhm.
might not have done the I'm a kidnapper worksheet yet, and they don't know too much about your work? Like what's the opening dialogue for somebody? It's like, God, Ashley, I really like want to follow my passion. I want to find my purpose, but I don't exactly know where to begin. I know it might not be a template, but is there a beginning dialogue you have with them for people in that specific niche?
Yeah, I mean, first, there's a quote in my book, and it says, intuition is knowing what you know without knowing why you know it. And I think we've kind of gotten cut off from that source because of so much noise around us. I mean, even as a kid, when it comes to my career, I was told about like being a veterinarian or being a doctor or a teacher or maybe an astronaut if I was feeling pretty extra as a kid. Like those were the careers I was told about. So there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of guidance that comes, and we all kind of come into the world with like an inner thermostat set by ourselves and our parents and of what we know is available. And so it makes sense that people aren't really connecting to anything beyond what they know because they're told what to know. And so when we set ourselves
Mm.
free of that and we give ourselves permission to know things without any reason why of knowing them, like for example, with COVID, I don't know if it's that I used to work for the government and national security, but like I know a government problem when I see one coming. And I messaged all my friends. I'm like, and I messaged them late February when it was still pretty much in China. Well, it was probably here, but and I said, this is gonna like change the world and we're all gonna be stuck in our houses for like a very long time. So prepare. And everybody thought I was insane. And I was one of the
Mm.
first ones to go out and get groceries and like toilet paper before like the shelves were cleared out. And
Did you invest
people,
in Bitcoin too?
no, I'm not
Oh,
very financially savvy with stuff like that.
goodness.
Like I
Okay.
don't really, but I should be.
If I can go back
Um,
and plant one seed,
Right?
it'll be
Well, if you
invest in
think about
Bitcoin.
animals, like they know on an island when a tsunami is coming, before the tsunami comes, they start
Yes.
running. So there's something intuitive inside of all of us as people and as mammals. And for me, the work is really in the body, like starting to notice when you feel a nudge, starting to notice when you feel pulled towards something, starting to notice. I mean, like I said in the TED Talk, there's 200 million neurons in our brain, in our gut, which is a cat or dog's brain size. So there's a lot of intelligence in our gut. There's a lot of intelligence in when our stomach sinks or when we feel butterflies. Like that's all intelligence from our body. That's all intuitive. Another thing is really important, I think, around intuition is understanding how it works. To me, and this is, my own approach, it's pretty absolute. It's not that emotional. So my intuition isn't like going on and on. If you're hearing long sentences and all sorts of stuff, that's like fear or emotions or something else. To me, intuition is absolute. It sounds like this is good for you. This is not good for you. Check this out. You're interested in this. Like that's it. And I think it's really about answering that call of when that part of you is speaking with you. And I think the longer you build a relationship with that part of you, the longer you listen to that part of you, the easier, obviously, it becomes to start living from that place.
It's really powerful. It brings up a conversation I had with Busy Gold where we talked about instinct and intuition. And I'm
Yeah.
super curious with your work. Instinct is like we all know that when a wolf is out there making decisions on what a wolf's going to eat, it's very instinctual. It's like a
Hmm.
primal, deep kind of ancient brain system that activates the nervous system. But like you're saying, there's this like soft whisper when it
Hmm.
comes to intuition. It's not just like a paralyzing jolt to the system.
Hmm.
How would you paint that picture of the two? How do you split the two, intuition and then instinct?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love Elizabeth Gilbert's TED talk about it, like genius and how genius by ancient tribes was something known to actually visit you and leave you. And so nobody is a genius, they're just visited by the genius. And I think that's kind of instinct as well. So I think that, or not, sorry, that's more intuition as well. So
Okay.
instinct for me is in the body and the cells. It's something that we are naturally programmed to do from a survival standpoint, from an existence standpoint. I think instinct is what kicks in when you're a new mother and you have a baby and you suddenly know how to do a bunch of stuff that nobody ever really taught you, because it's your instinct, it's in your cells and how we're programmed to survive. But I think intuition is like that genius that visits you, and I think it's a divine voice and force and something that is so much deeper than we might all realize at this moment in time.
When people go through your programs,
Hmm.
is there a sharpening of that intuition that
Yeah.
you provide to them? Obviously, it's not a 5 hour podcast,
Yeah.
so we can't go into the total A to Z. But like the beginning stages of that to spark curiosity for people. Really, that's what this is. We're just having a curious conversation about like what's really driving us here. Are
Yeah.
we driving ourselves? Or is programs and stories and beliefs and paradigms driving us? That's where my question comes from. So how do you begin that conversation when it comes to sharpening one's intuition? That
Yeah.
visiting that Gilbert talked about.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think sharpening it comes back to yourself and coming home to yourself, which is really the concept of making a U-turn in my book title. And it's YO U-turn, which is so different than a U-turn like when you're driving in traffic with just the letter U going back from where you came versus back to yourself, which is what a U-turn is really about. So for
Hmm.
me, if you're feeling off, I think the first step is stop making decisions and start getting back to yourself. And what that looks like is maybe coming up with a list of people or places or things that make you feel yourself. So in my case, like the ocean always makes me feel myself. I live by the beach in Los Angeles. So I know that when I feel kind of off kilter, that putting my feet in the sand, taking a walk, bringing my journal over there, it's always going to do something for me. There's also a few friends that I have that particularly, I have a lot of friends, but there's a few in particular that I've noticed after this person is with me, I'm me again. And it's not about them, it's about who I am with them and who I am with them. And I think at any given moment, it's funny, like even with romantic relationships, we're all kind of creating a cocktail with people. And it's not just like if your romantic relationships don't work out, like it's all on you and you need to look at what you did. A lot of the times, it's like, yes, process your things, learn how to be a better person. But there's something to be said about the cocktail that is created with someone else and what version of you it brings out and whether you like that version of you or not. So I try to get really aware of who brings out this version of me that feels like who I really am. And then another thing is hobbies. Like I love hip hop dance. And I used to love cupcakes until I found out I can't have gluten or dairy, which has been like really a buzzkill. So I'm trying to every recipe under the sun for cupcakes that are healthy. And these little things kind of bring me back into my essence. And when I'm from that space, I'm much more equipped to be creative in my work, face work, handle my job. And sometimes that means I need to take some time away or take some time off.
It's wonderful because in my question was the answer. In your work, you talk about you don't get the clarity by having the clarity, you get the clarity by engagement. And of course, in your answer about sharpening intuition, it's the same thing. You actually
Yeah,
sharpen your intuition by practicing the sharpening. So
exactly.
to me, it's not a shock, but I think a lot of people, I know for myself, I had a moment way before I launched the podcast, and I was like crying, asking God for support, trying to understand like why all these things had happened, and
Hmm.
really having that moment where I was on my knees.
Yeah.
Uh, have you had a moment where your intuition was very, very tested?
Yeah.
Maybe you made not necessarily the wrong U turn, because I hate using that term, right or wrong, but maybe you made a turn that it didn't necessarily give you the success you wanted, but it gave you like some really dark contrast that was also a gift. Has that
Hmm.
happened in your life for you? Was that specifically your time in government?
Yeah. It was definitely my time in government. Like I think at this point I'm pretty like dialed in with myself and yet I'm human. My missteps aren't going to be as much as like the universe hitting me with a 2x4 as it would have, when I was younger and I really didn't know myself.
Yes.
So that's why even with my book, like I open up on my first day at the Pentagon because working in national security, it's like I think about all the celebrities that kind of get to the top of where they think they want to be, and then they're like Britney Spears and they shave their head or have a drug addiction or just kind of
Yeah.
like lose their mind. And I wonder to myself, like, what happened to those people? Like, and I realized I kind of got what they got in a different way. They got to the top of the ladder of their dream at a young age and found out that it wasn't for them. That's what I did getting to the Pentagon. I thought that I wanted to be a spy, make a huge impact, protect people. When I got to the Pentagon at a young age, when I got in a high level job at a young age, I was gifted with the opportunity to see that the dream wasn't a fit for me without all of the years that most people spend buying into this belief that that dream is for them. And I think that's what happens when you hold on too tightly to a vision. It's like set your vision, but don't hold on too tightly because you are going to be met on the periphery when you're following what feels right in your life. So many different opportunities, and you're really constantly calibrating with the universe. So for me, coming into the Pentagon was a huge rock bottom. I had a colleague who I found out was getting paid almost 20K more than me for the same job. And I had an extra degree than he had. And I spoke more languages than he did. He wouldn't give me a desk. And I was on the Afghanistan station. So I was working on Afghanistan, and he made a joke like, you don't get a desk until you prove yourself just like women in Afghanistan have to. And so there, and I will say, by the way,
Mm.
that most people I worked with at the Pentagon were awesome, and there was none of that. But this guy had all sorts of that. And it really was a rock bottom for me to realize like there's two things in all of our careers that we have to be mindful of. The first thing is what you're doing, like the responsibilities you're taking on, the core skill set you're using. My core skill set is words. And in my book, I write about 10 different core skill sets. I misunderstood it when I went to the Pentagon because I didn't know myself well enough. So I thought, oh, working on intelligence reports, writing, that's all words. No, that's a different skill set that I write about in my book called analysis. I was in the analysis skill set. And so I was totally depleted. I was working out of my zone of genius, which is the what of my career, my skill set. And then the how of my career wasn't working for me either. And the how has to do with how your career looks. And given that we know that 50% of people leave their jobs because they don't like their boss, how your job looks matters. And so for me, that looked like working with people I didn't like. It looked like I wasn't always working inside the Pentagon since I was a defense contractor, but there's no windows in there. Like there was a lot about the setup that I was like, oh, this isn't going to work for me. I had to go to military bases, every few weeks, and I found them to be very depressing. One of them was in Indiana, looking like a sunken village on purpose for military exercises, like to make it more real. So it was like kind of a depressing, like the hills have eyes kind of place.
Mm.
And it even was a psych ward in the 80s. So turned into a military base. So
Energy might have still been there too.
totally. And
Hmm.
I'm a very sensitive person. So the how of my career wasn't working for me either, which comes back, I think, to your core values and the principles by which you really live your life.
Do people come to you to learn how to be a coach themselves?
They do. I'm really picky with coaches that I coach. Usually the new ones will take a course from me, but I like to take people on who have done something in their career and it's not coaching, and now they want to do coaching, or they have like they're an influencer with an
Sure.
email list, like something like that feels fun. But I actually own another company and we do speech writing and ghostwriting, and I don't do anything for that company except write the speeches. Especially a lot of TEDx's I've written, which are really, really fun.
You have this way with words. It's very powerful the way that you opened your TEDx. And did you always have that? Have you cultivated that? Did someone gift that to you? Is your dad good at that? Is your mom good at that? Like where does that come from? This ability to like let it rip but make sense at the same time.
Thank you. I think a lot, and I think I felt a lot as a kid, and I think there's a combination of
That's
things
awesome.
for
You're
that.
like, I think a lot.
Yeah, see, I'm not that great. I really think a
uh,
lot, and as a kid, I felt a lot, and I think words were my medicine because if you think about somebody who is sick and they're like going to all the doctors trying to get the answers, I'm sure you've heard of so many people like that. If they have something chronic, autoimmune, whatever, and then they finally find the doctor that can put words to what's happening for them, even if it's the worst diagnosis, there's like a relief for them. And I think that's what we do as healers and in personal development is when you're good at words, you have an opportunity to put words to something that people don't know how to voice. And it helps them process their life and make sense of things and make decisions from it and get to know themselves. And so for me, having had a lot of pain at a young age. Like I had a sister who was a drug addict who eventually passed away. I had a brother who he was in resources and was a slower learner. Now he's super sharp and I think he's probably like mild autism. I don't know, but he's very sharp and very successful and married and all of this stuff. But as a kid, I felt a lot of pain, like seeing him struggle to learn when I was a quick learner. My dad definitely has a way with words, spoken words, but written words, there's a lot of typos and he writes in all caps lock, which is a whole nother thing.
So it's
So
like
I
he's
don't know where it
shouting
came
at you
from.
the whole time.
Yeah. He wrote a whole memoir of
Can you
himself in
pick up
six
some
pages.
bread?
Yeah, totally.
Gluten free.
Yeah.
Okay, the reason I asked you about coaching is because it's one of the pillars, you know, the core skill set, the money blueprint, which I'd love to talk about the thermostat you mentioned earlier too, the core interests, and also becoming your own coach. So this is like real tools to be your best self in times of like, oh my God, I'm leaving my body.
Yeah.
I'm so angry at this person. I can't even feel myself. Intuition's out the window.
Yeah.
I'm hijacked by my biology.
Hmm.
So my friend Christine Hassler, she has this beautiful way to describe it. She says, "Are you an inner critic or are you an inner coach?" And I'm like, that's beautiful. And that's why
Yeah.
I asked you about coaching, because I don't think people need to be quote coaches for other people, but they really get to learn how to be a coach for themselves and
Yeah.
parent themselves and love themselves in that way. So how does that conversation start in your book? And then obviously people are going to read the chapter and go into the book itself, but can you give us just a teaser of that in your book?
Yeah, that was one of my biggest intentions writing the book was like there's nothing inspiring about a coach wanting groupies and clients that come back forever because they're like the idea is to coach them into like their own self-sustaining patterns and habits and ways of being. So,
9 months or less, we're done.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't want you for
exactly.
any longer than 9 months.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for me, that was huge in the book. The book is an 11-step roadmap. There's 12 chapters. I didn't make it a 12-step roadmap because I thought it would be weird to have a 12-step program book that's not AA. So it's an 11
Yeah.
step roadmap on how to get clarity. Every single chapter is really geared towards bringing you into my world so that you and I could go into our career together. You can see my stories with yourself. Maybe you didn't work in counterterrorism like I did, but I'm sure you can relate to the first chapter walking into an opportunity you thought would be great and realizing it's not a fit for you. And so, what I really do as a coach is I answer all of the thoughts that I know you're probably having throughout those moments. And I give you advice on what to do with yourself in those moments. And I end every chapter with exercises so that you can learn how to ask yourself questions and be there for yourself. Another thing that I really focus on for myself is inner child work. Like, I really try to speak kindly to myself. And that's taken years. Like that's a process. And the thing about self-love is that you don't really know how much you have until everything is ripped away from you and you don't have anybody, especially if you're going through a breakup, like you don't have that partner anymore validating you and you're by yourself. That's when it counts. That's when
Yeah.
the blanket's ripped off of you and you get to be there for yourself and you get to see how you're doing with that in real life because you don't get to hide behind anybody giving you those words, giving you that praise. And so for me, I just speak really kindly to myself. I try to notice where I don't like myself so that I can improve that. And I'm not a perfectionist. I think the personal development space is actually a little bit infected by people who are always trying to be better when sometimes the real work is to accept yourself and not be better, but to be okay with where you are. I think that sometimes in self help, it's like, um, let me just fix versus I need to accept and work on. And so my book is really a game of helping people understand their core nature, the energy they bring to the room, their core skill set, which one of the 10 that they really lead with in their career, their core motivators, like what motivates them at work, their core values. So you can hear the word core throughout. And that's really what I show up with. And every single chapter is a different U turn for that.
I'm blown away with just how able you are to truly get to the heart of the matter, because
Thank
the
you.
heart of the matter is either you're either living with breath and with purpose and intention and moving in a direction that your soul is guiding you to, or you're falling into someone else's dream.
Yeah.
And I don't want to shame. This is not me shaming anyone. It's okay to kind of veer off the path as long as you're moving forward.
Yeah.
When you were counterterrorism and you were in that career, and it sounds like there was a bit of like misogyny you were dealing with,
Yeah.
uncomfortableness.
Yeah.
What did you learn from? What was the gift? What was the
Yeah.
gift that helped realign you to your purpose? Like, and how do you even use some of the stuff from counterterrorism to
Yeah.
apply to the current day?
Well, I mean, definitely when you go into the intelligence field, you learn some people skills that are taught, like little strategies, like mirroring, or I don't really use those on people though. It's not like I'm like getting to know people thinking like, oh, let me use that tactic that I learned on the military base to get people to trust me. But I do think the reason I was drawn to that path in the first place was because I'm warm and I like people. And so I thought that I could use those skills to help the government. That being said, I think honestly what that did for me was it shook me up and disappointed me so badly that I really had to like listen to it. And there's a blessing in that. Um, as far as the people go, it gave me a huge reference point of what it can look like in the workforce when things are working, when they're not. I stayed in the workforce for quite some time before I started my business, and I'm really grateful for being able to relate to people. What I will say that you kind of touched on is um, there's this really interesting time with purpose where you're kind of in between, where whatever you're doing isn't working for you anymore, and whoever you want to be isn't really clear yet. I think that little sweet spot of time is where people can create a lot of damage for their career if they don't manage themselves. Because if you force an answer, that's like walking up to a flower and forcing the petals open when it's like
Hmm.
trying to bloom. It's just a horrible look, you know? So,
There's a divine
um,
timing.
it's divine timing. It's doing the things I talked about on the list of that make you feel yourself, giving yourself that gift so that you are able to, I don't know, reconnect to yourself and allow those answers. Like there's nothing fulfilling about forcing your career. You're going to be exhausted and you can't even keep it up. And it usually isn't aligned with who you truly are anyway. And the thing about who you truly are is it always wins, it's always going to shine through. So, and that's the case in relationships too. Like if you're in the wrong thing, your personality, your needs, they're going to get loud at some point and they're going to break the whole thing down at some point. So the question often becomes like, do you want to rip the band-aid off this week and cry, or do you want to cry next year and do it then? Like it's all indefinite. And so trusting that portal of time, trusting who you are to shine through and just doing things that nurture your sense of self are really key in that little sweet spot.
How's your training in self awareness worked out for you in your own personal relationships, romantic
Yeah,
or?
such a good question. It's really powerful in my friendships. Like I can see a lot of my personal development in my friendships. Like I went to hang out with a bunch of girls that I really love, and at any given moment, there's probably 5 women who like deeply have me on their mind, and they're holding like big appointments I have in their awareness, or big opportunities that I'm doing, and they'll message me right before, good luck with that thing. I feel very loved, and I have a lot of love to give my friendships. So a lot of the personal development I've done have shown up with my women in my life and the relationships I have. It's shown up with my family. I used to have a lot of resentments with my dad, like losing everything, and how I ended up repeating his pattern, losing a lot of money as well. And I talk about
Wow.
that in my book.
The
But
generational hooks that I was talking about earlier.
exactly. And I had $500,000 of debt that I paid off myself. I don't know why I was too stubborn to claim bankruptcy and pay all that corporate debt off. But it's like I've learned to not be in blame with my parents. And that's the thing. Like, whether they did that thing or not, if you're doing that thing, it's you now that's doing that thing. It's not them anymore. It's you, and you have to work with it. So I've forgiven my family. I think in my romantic relationships, with my partner, like we've had a very deep relationship with a lot of dimension. But with the depth comes a lot more to work on. Like, oh my God.
The more
Like
you dig, the more is there.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
definitely am actually open to um I'm selectively spiritual. So I have the tools, I have the awareness. I also am okay with me having judgment sometimes. I'm okay with people judging things sometimes. I'm okay with not working on that issue sometimes. So I think
Yeah.
that's what also brings me into being a human as well.
Human experience shows us deep contrast
Yeah.
between decision or indecision, or in this certain case, um, just making the choice to not deal with something
Yeah.
because your capacity is either uh, working on something else or being fed to something else. There's a lot of things you mentioned today that have been so profound. One of them
Yeah.
is that you talked about people who, and you use different words, but I'll say it in my way, bypass things. They
Yeah.
either go for it or they bypass it. And
Mhm.
one thing that I've seen a lot in personal development, specifically, I guess you could say in the spirituality world, because we delve into that on the show quite a bit. Spiritual bypassing.
Yeah.
There is such a massive abuse of people masquerading as light or masquerading as good energy or masquerading as something they're not. It goes back to my initial question for you of sharpening the intuition. But are there
Hmm.
telltale signs that you personally, as an influencer, as a speaker, as a coach yourself,
Hmm.
look for in other people that you want to receive information from?
Yeah.
Are there certain ways of being that you throw a red flag towards?
Yeah. I'm the person, actually. It's so sharp of you to be asking me this question, because this is the thing that all my girlfriends say, like, this is your superpower. And they ask me when they're about to do a business deal, if I meet the person, not from like a judgmental standpoint where I'm judging the person, but like, oh, how do you feel about that person? And we have a really sacred group. And it's not in the kind of way where it's like, you can't sit with us. It's in a way of like, the water is clear and I don't want any mud in the water that we've all kind of filtered with each other.
Uh-huh.
And so every now and again, somebody will come in, and everybody is so generous. So generous. And so I can pick up on somebody with an agenda for sure. I think that comes from my counterterrorism training, like feeling people's thoughts and feeling them with an agenda. And one sign that I don't like is fast friendship, where the person is saying, like, we're best friends, maybe after a month or two.
Or somebody that's like, after 2 weeks, I love you, brother. I'm like, you've known me for
Mhm.
2 weeks. What are you
Yeah.
talking about? You love me.
Yeah.
What is
I feel
going
like,
on there?
and they might mean it, but it's like,
I don't
I think
know.
there's an element of wounding to not allowing time to mature something
Yes.
and prove itself. And I'm a big proponent of that, and I know I wasn't before, because as an intuitive person, I used to say, if it feels right, the connection is beyond time. But now I'm both. I'm like, if it feels right, the connection's beyond time, and I value time and what will unfold in this connection through time. So when, especially with my business friends, where they all have large platforms, anyone that's coming in and saying, like, we're best friends, and they're posting them on Instagram and tagging them and wanting them to be retagged, I can feel the agenda.
Yeah.
They want to do business partnerships with them, and it's actually quite a painful thing, because sometimes it's really not my place to say anything, and I can't even share everything I want to share when people ask me, because it's not about me being appropriate. I just also like want to be respectful and let people have their own thoughts about their lives too. So I just share and I'm a straight shooter, so I'll share what I
Yes.
see within reason.
I love our conversation. I have to have you back on the show at some point to
Thank you
go a
so
little
much
bit
for
deeper
having me.
in your next project. We scratched the surface of U-Turn. So it's on Amazon right now. Ashley Stahl, U-Turn, Get Unstuck, Discover, keyword discover, not force, discover. Take the time on a graduated process where she leads you through it. And then lastly, design your dream career. We covered a lot of ground. We
Thank
went to some
you.
cool places. I didn't get to ask you all the questions I wanted, but we'll do it on the next round. Is there anything that you really want to leave people with energetically, emotionally, spiritually, maybe somatically when it
Yeah.
comes to this U turn?
Yeah, I think the message of the book that we kind of talked about, that I want to just reiterate, is who you are always wins. Like, really face who you are now, because the pain of not doing that is what caused so much anxiety. And the sooner that you face the truth, it might be sad. The truth sometimes is sad. The truth is sometimes inconvenient, but there's not a lot of anxiety in it usually. And so I just want to remind people, who you are always wins. Be who you are.
Mm, beautiful. And if you could give a parting advice to this definition, this understanding of wellness, like this is a signature question that I ask everyone.
Hmm.
And for me, it's changed so much.
Yeah.
How you even see wellness. You're in a wellness journey right now. It's how we got on the phone together, right? When we
Yeah.
started this call. I'm blown away with how people answer this question. I'm really curious what this means to you. How do you define wellness?
I would say, for me, I'm well when I'm radiantly healthy. So my mind is healthy, my body is healthy, my relationships are healthy. Um, and I'm constantly usually working on one. Right now, it's my body, my physical being. Last year, it was my relationship. Sometimes it's my career, but radiant health on all levels.
AshleyStahl.com is where people can find out more about you. But where do you
Yeah.
play? Like, where can people really connect with you deeply? What's the start of the journey for people that want
Yeah.
to work with you?
Well, I hope anybody who feels like something's missing at work gets my book. It's like the most proud thing I have out there because I know how good it is and how much it makes a difference for people. So you can check that out anywhere books are sold. But I would say my podcast, which I'm going to have you on, U Turn podcast, YOU Turn, just like everything else. I do little solo conversations when I'm having all sorts of thoughts. I did one the other day when I was walking my dog. I had a big rush of thoughts. And so I did a voice note to my audience, but I really
Mm.
love connecting with people through that too.
All right, everything's in the show notes, you guys. Thank you, Ashley, for coming on the show. Deep
Thank
bow to
you.
the really sharpening of the intuition that you're giving people so that they can make better choices.
Thank you.
Until we see you again soon, Ashley and I are both wishing you love and wellness. We'll talk to you then.